All right, so now we're recording. So welcome to those watching the recording. Um, so for everyone else, I want to start off with a few questions and maybe just go around a little bit talking about, and we kind of did it a little bit. Kathy just talked about how kind of intimidating Revelation can be. But I want to know, what is your impression of Revelation? What do you hear about it? Have you ever read it? Do you only know it through popular culture? What do you even feel when you think about Revelation? So anybody want to jump in first?
Well, I'll jump in saying that a lot of it is, maybe all of it basically, is symbolic. And once you know what the symbols are talking about, it's easier to understand.
Yeah, so there's a lot of symbols, and that can lead to some interesting interpretation.
Yeah, right.
Anyone else, the sort of feelings you get when you're, or things you hear about Revelation, or any experience with the book?
I've only read it a couple of times, but it always reminds me of end days and the fact that, Lord, take me, when you're ready to come back, because I don't want to be here, when all of that happens.
Very true.
Well, and Jim, I don't know did you close out that little picture? Oh, it's fine. We don't have to. But he had a little picture of a woman looking out of a door, with this sort of bleak expression going, what day, what part of the book of Revelation is happening today? This idea, well, the world's ending. But yeah, so Revelation gets associated a lot with end times, Armageddon, apocalypse. These are words we throw around. Prophecies. Yeah, and so that can be both fearful and hopeful. And that is perhaps intentional. So that's certainly one thing we'll be doing. Anybody else with experiences?
Well, my experience with it was when I was a teenager, particularly. I went to a pretty standard Methodist church, but we had very evangelical youth leaders, and they tried to scare us to death with the Book of Revelations. And
Oh,
we watched movies like where movies about people disappearing, and I forget the name of it. There was a big one out in the 70s. I can't remember the name of it, but so I never really fell for it, but it was just kind of the impression that was made on me at that time.
So yeah, Revelation is used as a weapon sometimes, as much of the Bible is, even the Bible as a whole. But yeah, Revelation does have a lot of people associate it with a negative connotation. I would definitely say that's true. It's part of its sort of intimidating aspect, or fearful of it. For a lot of reasons, there are definitely parts of the church that talk about Revelation a lot more than many others. I would say my experience with most Methodists is they avoid it as much as they can. But then those who are comfortable with it perhaps use it too much. So yeah.
When I was a youth, we did a haunted forest thing at another church that was kind of based on the Left Behind series, but started with John at Patmos, on his little desert island. That was the first scene, but led into the haunted house thing for October that we went to as a church. So yes.
Well, and there's things like this that get associated with Revelation. This is the dragon, the big red dragon, and then the woman underneath. Whore of Babylon. You'll hear quite a bit. So it's this is a William Blake, and William Blake was a bit of a wild one, but I love his drawings because he takes a very literal approach, but then they're very fantastical. So I'll share a bunch of these sort of crazy images as we go. And welcome, Al. Good to have you. We're just talking about sort of general impressions of Revelation before we even read it. So.
Well, it's good to be here. I'm sorry I'm late. It was one of those evenings.
There are days
FYI,
like
you're
that,
being
yes.
So yeah, any other impressions or experiences with Revelation? Thoughts or anything?
I just think I understand it less than any other book. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been, it's a book I've always avoided, just because it does seem so intimidating and so frightening. But I actually I've read it once recently. I read through the whole book of Revelation, and there were some things in it that really kind of caught me by surprise. Reading about some of the hopeful things in Revelation, you kind of think, oh, what is this doing in the book of Revelation? Revelation's supposed to be about, the end of days and, people bursting into flames and, the whole ultimate, war between good and evil, the final confrontation. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about Revelation.
Yeah, it can be surprising what's actually in there. It's a bigger book than most people realize. And there are images in there that are very powerful. I mean, obviously, I did the little Bible study about the city of God, but there's also the tree and river of life and the water that flows out of the temple, which is a throwback to Isaiah. And then also in some of the letters to the churches, which are in the beginning, John has some very uplifting things to say. Well, about most of the churches. There's a few people. But yeah, and this is on purpose, and we'll talk about that, about this sort of hope in one hand and what I would say pressure in the other hand. Not so much judgment. We'll talk about why it's not judgment when we get there, but it's this, sort of weighty anxiety on one hand, which is meant to be the actual world, and then there's the hope of Christ. And the book pairs them along as you go. So yeah, and welcome, Kitty. So any other impressions, things you've heard? Okay, so I want to talk about first things before we get into the nitty-gritty of the book itself. I want to talk about the literary genre. Whenever you pick up a book, you pick up a fiction or a nonfiction. You pick up a fiction book, it might be a mystery or a science, sci-fi, adventure, romance, whatever. And that's going to define some of the tropes, some of the ways it is written, right? Many of you probably know this, but just like to make sure we're all in the same English class back in middle school. But and nonfiction's the same way. A biography is not written the same as a history book, not written the same as a scientific book. So every book in the Bible also has a genre. They are not all identical. The book of Genesis is very different than the book of Deuteronomy, or probably the easiest example is the books of Kings. So Samuel 1 and 2, Kings 1 and 2, all talk about this great long period of history for the kingdom of Israel and Judah. The book of Chronicles 1 and 2 talk about the exact same thing in the exact same amount of time. So why is it repeated? Why do we have multiple versions of the exact same story?
Why?
The reason is they're different genres, meaning they're written for different purposes. Chronicles is written, ironically, as a chronicle. It is categorizing dates, names, places. It is a listing. It is very much boring history of this person did this at this place at this time. And so the reality is Chronicles is probably more historically or factually accurate. Samuel and Kings is more about the narrative. It's more about the story of a people. And so you might argue that it may not be as factual, but it may be more truthful, and that it gives insight into what is happening. And if you were to really get particular, you will notice there are discrepancies between a book like Chronicles and those books. But those discrepancies don't matter because they're not writing for the same purpose. They might have some dates off, they might mess up a name here or there, rearrange a king, mix a father and son around or something. And that's just all errors. But it's because sometimes they don't care. It's not about that. And so that's important to remember for any book of the Bible. It's important to figure out the genre. So, Revelation has its own genre. It is within the prophetic genre, prophecies. And there are a number of prophetic books in the Bible. And then we'll even get to a subgenre called Apocalypse, which is only Daniel and Revelation. And those who were in my last class, you're going to hear the same stuff about apocalyptic literature. But first, the bigger one, prophecy, prophetic literature. When you hear the word prophecy or prophet, what do you think of? What's the thing?
Foretelling.
Foretelling?
Mm-hmm.
So like talking about the future?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Delivering God's words.
God's word?
Yeah, delivering God's word, receiving and delivering God's word.
Yeah, delivering God's word. And that'll be important because prophecy has something very specific about that. But yeah, so God's word, delivering, receiving.
Not always foretelling, but giving and receiving, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Yeah, they were speaking in some cases to the people that day, in that day and age.
Right. So prophecy as a word, we might use, I can remember, this is very random, but in college we would play a silly game. And one of the things that you would do to people is make people end their sentences with, in accordance with the prophecy. And yada, yada, yada. But the idea being that, this prophecy is something that has foretold the future, and you are going to fulfill these things that somebody, predicted would happen. So there's this idea of foretelling, right? However, this is sort of a this is not a great way to think about prophecy when it comes to the Bible. Prophecy as a literature is much larger than the Bible. There are tons of cultures that use it in a lot of different ways. But when it comes to the Bible, prophecies do sometimes talk about the future, but they're not really interested in the future. That's not the point they're trying to make. Prophecy, as Anne sort of mentioned, and as we'll talk about in Revelation, but prophecy is spoken at a specific time and place to get an action in a specific time and place. And that's usually the present. So in the Old Testament, you have books like Hosea and Micah, all the minor prophets in the back. They are usually servants of a particular king, and they are usually admonishing said king or the people of Israel for some poor faith they are having in that moment. There's one in particular, one prophet who he says, all of Israel will be in warfare for the rest of time. It will be, the temple will fall. It'll be in the hands of other persons. The land will be torn in two. Brother will fight brother in the land. And it sounds terrible. Does that sound like anything going on today?
Yeah.
It does. Sounds exactly like Israel and Palestine, right? But Hosea, who is essentially doing that prophecy, the reason he says those things is because he is mad at the people of Israel for eating raisin cakes and having orgies in the temple. Do you think they're eating too many raisin cakes and having too many orgies in the temple in Jerusalem today?
No.
I don't think they're not related. But so what he's talking about, Hosea, and some of the other prophets that are around this, is that there's a pagan, Philistine, or local sex cult that is sort of in Jerusalem and in the community. These were very common back then, actually, so don't be shocked, but that's just how it was. Part of the cult was the temple food was this raisin cake thing. And so he came out saying no Jew should ever eat raisin cakes. And so he talks about Israel being destroyed, not to say this is what's going to happen in the future. He talks about it to try to get them to change their action right now. If I'm a football coach and I tell my team, if you don't get your act together, you're going to lose every game for the rest of the season. No one's ever going to respect you. No one's ever going to do, you're never going to be any good. Why are you saying that to the team? You're hoping the team will change the way they're acting so that those things don't actually happen. Right? This is how prophecy works. But you might write the quote of that coach down and put it on the wall. And 20 years later, they might read it when they're doing terrible and go, see, he was right. It happened to us. Well, it has nothing to do with the team anymore, right? It's all different people, all different, So we often take these prophecies way out of context.
What about when it says, when the Holy Spirit comes, your sons and daughters shall prophesy? Does that mean just speaking God's word, do you think? Or does it mean foretelling?
So usually I would say not foretelling. When it's your sons and daughters will prophesy, the word prophecy literally means to give a message.
Right.
So they will give message of God. They'll deliver the news. And there is also a sort of sense that the day the Spirit comes is this day of totality, of wholeness, which we will get into a whole lot in Revelation. And so prophets often use that sort of time frame, this sort of long ending time frame, to sort of get action now. And like so today, I might say, the kingdom of God is coming, and we needed to have action now to help it come sooner, right? That's kind of how a prophet works. And so even today, you might hear a preacher, and you can even comment that, they're being very prophetic. They're maybe talking about these sort of extreme or hard issues, but it affects me today. So a lot of what we might call a social justice preacher or somebody like that are prophetic preachers. They're speaking in these big ways, often symbolic. Martin Luther King, in a lot of ways, was a prophet, talking about the mountain and all these sort of big images. But what he was talking about was people dealing with people on the street at that moment, right? And trying to create change in that moment. So that's what a prophecy genre wants to do. They want to use big words, big images to evoke change in a person now. And so symbolism is often a part of that. Book of Hosea is just one I know. I mean, Hosea, as part of his prophecy, goes and marries a prostitute, Gomer.
Yeah.
And that action is a symbolism. And then his children are named terrible things. And then they're changed to good names. But it's all symbolic acts around whether Israel is faithful or not. So it's all this sort of, I hesitate to say show, but it's this big emotional, sort of hyperbole almost. But it's intended to make action now. And part of what creates that is prophecy is also in the Bible characterized by the direct word of God. We call the Bible the word of God. We call Christ the word of God. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about God talking directly. Actual quotes. The Lord God said, ... And this doesn't happen as much as you might think. It only really happens in prophetic books. It'll happen in Genesis because there's no one else to talk to in the beginning.
Right. That's a good excuse.
But Moses is called a prophet because he talks directly to God. Abraham talks directly to God. Elijah, Elisha, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel. Most of these people have a book named after them or big roles, but they speak directly to God. And then, so in Revelation, we're going to have an interesting aspect in that John, the writer, and we'll talk about who he is in a minute, will speak directly to Christ and a messenger. And so in some ways, Christ and this messenger angel thing act as mediaries between him and God. But then there's also this sense that Christ is God, right? So he is in some ways talking directly to God, making this a prophecy. So because it has the direct words of God. So any questions on prophecy as a big genre? We're about to jump into apocalyptic prophecy, or apocalyptic genre, which is a subgenre and is what Revelation's really going to be about. And there'll be 5 things we talk about now. You may want to even take notes on it because they'll come up a lot. But any general prophecy or prophets, remember the word prophet means messenger. That's also super helpful because it's the same translation in Arabic. When you think about Islam and the prophet Muhammad, the messenger Muhammad, it's important to think of the word that way. It's the same word for angel. It's all the same.
I was just going to ask you about that.
It's just a difference between Hebrew and whatever, but prophet, angel, messenger, originally all from the same roots. And so think about that. Angels are employees of the divine. They're part of the holy host. And so a prophet, to hear the direct word of God, becomes in many ways part of that. And then in many ways, Moses is sort of remembered as somebody in direct contact with God in a way no others are, or any of the major prophets. Okay, so we'll move into apocalyptic literature. So the first thing is the word apocalypse. Many people associate apocalypse with the end times. This is the coming apocalypse. That doesn't actually make sense as far as the word. The word literally means revelation or epiphany, or so to be revealed. It means hidden sight, if you want to get started into breaking down the Greek and all that kind of stuff. So a apocalypse is a revelation. So the Greek name of this book is the Apocalypse of Jonah, really. So John, the Apocalypse of John. And so we call it Revelation today. It is not revelations. It's not plural. I say that all the time, and it's just a mistake, but so it's just one revelation. It's one solid dream from start to finish. The whole book is one vision or one conversation, however you want to sort of imagine this. So it's one complete thing. It's also part of the intimidating factor. It's intended to be taken as a whole. And it's really big and complicated, so it's hard to do that. But it often references back on itself a lot. And so, and I'll help us work through all that as we go through it. But so that's, think of it as the dream, the one solid dream of John, the one vision of John, the one message of John. All this works. So apocalyptic literature, of which there are 2 books in the Bible, Revelation in the New Testament, and then Daniel in the Old Testament, are the 2 apocalyptic genre books. There are parts of Ezekiel and parts of Isaiah which also fit this genre, but we're not going to get into those. So for Revelation and Daniel, there are 5 aspects that make it apocalyptic, and 5 sort of assumptions that the writer sort of has, and are things that you should know as a reader. Apocalyptic literature, to us today in the modern world, is very foreign. Like, nobody's out there writing in this style to communicate to us. Actually, as I say that, there are a lot of politicians using apocalyptic. Well, and this is,
Language.
Now,
if
here's
anything,
another topic.
this is to their credit, and it's to the credit of apocalyptic literature as a powerful force that is still relevant today, thousands of years later. But the way the use of language and the use of some of the assumptions and imagery create emotion, and create action, and that's the intention. Now, whether they use it for good or evil or indifference, that you can figure that out on your own. And I'm not here to talk about that, but I'm here to talk about how it's in the Bible. But so the first assumption, the first thing we have to understand when it comes to an apocalyptic literature is, number one, God's sovereignty over all of the history and over all of the cosmos. And so God, the divine, will be portrayed as the one who controls history in its entirety and holds the key to all mysteries. An example of this sort of reference in Revelation would be like in Revelation 21, the reference to God as the Alpha and the Omega. These are the Greek letters, essentially A and Z, the beginning and the end of the Greek alphabet. Omega is not Z, but you get the idea, the beginning and the end. And that God is the beginning of history, is the end of history, and everything in between. And so when you come into Revelation, you have to understand the writer, the message presumes that you know this and that you want to know this, and have accepted this to some degree, that God is in control of all things, past, present, future. So that's our first assumption. The second assumption is that the divine revelation, so the divine message, can only be accessed through the intermediary, through intermediary heavenly beings. So as we talked about, sort of with a normal prophecy, a prophet like Moses will talk directly to God. However, in apocalyptic literature, the subgenre of prophecy, there's usually an angel or an intermediary. In Daniel, there is an angel. In Revelation, it will be Jesus and an angel speaking together in different parts. And there's some argument that it's really just the same Jesus, just looking a little different depending on the language. And it's functioning as this intermediary between the divine. Revelation, part of that is also building up sort of the Trinitarian idea, which was being developed at this time of there's the Spirit, Jesus, and God, and sort of this levels of contact with humans. Whereas in the Old Testament, there's only God and angels, and the angels are the go-between. So that's our second assumption. Moving on into the third, is ultimate vindication. This genre, apocalyptic literature, exists with a mindset that 100% believes, does not doubt, that the cause of God will prevail in all things. That whatever God's will is, will happen. Now, when it happens, how it happens, all of that is usually sort of worked out. But there is always, in the end, an ultimate victory. And this victory can take place at the end of time, which is often why we talk about this foretelling of revelation or prophecy. However, not all of apocalypse literature is concerned with eschatology, which is the study of the end times. So it's a mistake to conflate the two ideas, that the ultimate vindication, ultimate victory, and what will happen at the end times are in the same conversation, the same book, the same genre. They're separate. They will relate to each other. So when you read Revelation, yes, Revelation will have some things to say about the end times, but Revelation is not only talking about the end times. Apocalypse literature is talking about the ultimate victory of God, and remember, throughout all of history, because God functions throughout all of history. And so it's not just concerned with the end. It's actually concerned with beginning to end. But because of the way prophecies are told and the way people talk, we talk about the end to get things to happen in the middle. So that was number 3. Moving on to number 4, which is symbolic language. The truth of God's actions, be they past, present, or future, are too profound to be expressed in plain language, and therefore must be communicated through graphic images that usually convey symbolic meanings. So, one of the popular ones, which I showed you before, and I will pull up again the image here once I find it, is, oh, as you can see my notes, but
Okay.
but here we go. So this is the dragon and the whore of Babylon, and the dragon of 7, has 7 heads and 7 backs, and in this case she is being defeated by the dragon, but earlier, that's an 18. In Revelation 17, she is described as riding the dragon of 7 backs. And so, yeah, this image is very graphic and very powerful and can evoke a lot of emotions of all different kinds. But when we break down the symbols, we can come to some conclusions. The whore of Babylon is a reference to the city of Rome. Babylon does not exist as a city at the time of the writing. However, Rome does, and Rome is the seat of a lot of power and a lot of conflict between Christians and the rest of the world. The city of Babylon, the city of Rome, is always referred in the feminine. And the city of Rome is the city built on 7 hills. So when she sits atop a dragon with 7 backs, she is sitting atop the city of Rome. And so it's this image of Rome as this chaotic, evil force. And the people of the day of that time would have immediately understood, oh, a woman sitting on 7 hills, 7 backs, 7 humps, whatever, that's Rome. And now it described as a dragon would obviously, oh, so it's a negative thing. And we will get into fine detail about some of these symbols as we go through the reading of Revelation. But these symbols and these images are intended to express a sort of greater truth that can't be understood by just saying the city of Rome is bad, right? And so, as we talked about with politicians, they can just say these people are bad, or they can say these people are criminals and this and that and all these crazy language and this is, all this stuff. And this sort of flagrant, we call it gaslighting, right? They're just blowing you up with all this stuff. And both sides do it in different ways. But this is a standard part of this sort of symbolic imagery to evoke great emotions. So then lastly, the 5th aspect of apocalypse literature, and one that perhaps gets forgotten too often, is that this genre has a enduring optimism, and that serves as the basis for the exhortation. So the basis for why it's being written, the basis for, the sort of call to action. The sort of apocalyptic view is at the end of the day hopeful. There are short-term visions, long-term visions of the future that may appear bleak. They may even be spiraling downward for much of the vision. The end is always a sort of magnificent divine intervention that will ensure God's promise, so that ultimate victory will happen no matter what. And so in the book of Revelation, as we get to chapter 21 in the very end, you're going to find the new heaven and the new earth, the new Jerusalem, which take over all the chaos, all the conflict, all the struggle that is within the earlier visions. And so these 5 aspects, or 5 assumptions, 5 frameworks, or whatever you want to call it, are what make up the book of Revelation and what make it tick. And so keeping those sort of 5 things written on the side of your Bible or on a little note next to your Bible are going to be extremely helpful as you read through Revelation. The sort of, as you read a section or a chapter and then look back at that and go, okay, so what did I see of these things? And that will help you frame something. But so, are there any questions about sort of apocalyptic literature, those 5 aspects? Any thoughts or?
No, but it might be helpful, especially before we read, if we're ending up reading for next week. It might be helpful if you would give us just those 5 things again, just a sentence. I don't mean the long explanation, but just a sentence of each of the 5.
Well, so number 1.
No, I meant to type it,
Okay.
to put it in the email
I can email
at
it.
some point.
An email.
Oh, yeah.
I'll email it to everybody. That'll be really easy. So I'll email it.
Good idea.
But any other questions or thoughts about sort of apocalypse? Does that help sort of maybe put into a reference some of the, you hear a lot of things about Revelation, and you've probably heard little bits and snippets of all of the things I just mentioned, but probably not all together. So no questions, we'll get into the actual writer and history. That's a whole lot of literary, my English teacher would be proud, literary context. So we'll actually talk about the actual book. So first I want to show you a picture of where in the world we are. And that is my email. But we are here in Turkey. And so up here, Istanbul is over here. You then come down, you have a whole bunch of the Greek Isles. So there's like roads with Colossus of Rhodes. Crete is down here. Cyprus is over here. You have the island of Patmos, which is where Revelation, the very opening, he'll say, I am John, I'm on Patmos. So this is where he's writing. And he writes to 7 churches in Asia. And Asia Minor, or Asia, is a Roman province of what modern day Turkey. And so these are the churches he writes to: Pergamum, Smyrna, Ephesus, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And you'll probably have heard of, my first appointment was at Smyrna United Methodist Church. I've seen some Sardises. There's plenty of, Ephesus things out there. Plenty of Philadelphia UMCs. So this is the part of the world we're writing in. So John of Patmos, as the writer self-identifies, has traditionally been attributed as the Apostle John. So as in John who wrote the Gospel of John, the disciple whom Jesus loves, as he calls himself in the Gospel of John. However, today scholars find that assumption to be very inconclusive. We're not saying it can't be the Apostle John, but we're finding it difficult to say that it is for certain. What we do know about the writer is that they have intimate knowledge of the Jerusalem temple. They have very good knowledge of the Old Testament writings and Palestinian apocalyptic literary genre. Now, if you remember, John's a fisherman who probably, until after Jesus and until he's working in the temple and things like that, probably didn't really know how to read or write until after Christ dies. So the idea that he would have like this massive knowledge of temple practice, of Old Testament literature, and other also Greek literature is where scholars go, that's a bit hard to stretch. He's not Paul, right? Paul is a lawyer and temple priest who is a Roman citizen and educated very early and very rich very early, and has a lot of that sort of background. John's a fisherman, so he doesn't. He spent most of his days half naked on the water until Jesus came along. What we do know is that it is a Palestinian Jewish Christian who most likely moved into what is called the diaspora. So this is when the Jews sort of flee some of the lands of Israel after the first Jewish revolt against Rome. This happens roughly in the years 66 to 73 CE, Common Era, or after Christ, however you want to record it. So again, we don't know how old Saint John was, the Apostle John, when Jesus meets him. We assume he's a grown man. Jesus was 30. We assume that he's probably somewhere between 30 or 20 to 30 when they meet around the year 30. So then John would have been, would have had to have left Jerusalem at the age of 60 to 70, right? And then some other things we learn here about the references to the pre-temple destruction materials, how the temple acted, but also the knowledge of these churches in modern day Turkey, which were not really prevalent until roughly 80 CE. We tend to place the events now during the reign of Emperor Domitian, which is in the years 81 to 96 CE, which would have made the Apostle John 80 to 90 years old, in a day and age when living to 40 was considered ancient. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's unlikely. And also, John's a super popular name. There's a lot of Johns referenced in the Bible, actually, that are not just the Saint John. But it really doesn't matter a whole much, but you'll see a lot of traditional writings say this was Saint John or the Apostle John. I prefer to call him John the Revelator because that's a great song, a gold blues gospel song, John the Revelator, writing to the seven seas. Emperor Diocletian, I'm going to give you a picture of him too, because he has a nice picture, and he has a nice marble bust in the Louvre, or the Louvre, or however you say it. Traditionally, Diocletian was considered to be a tyrannical leader who persecuted Christians heavily. However, modern historians, in going back, have looked at this, and we noticed the only writings we have of him come from the Senate. And it was very common that if the people in the empire were doing good, the Senate hated the emperor because the Senate wanted power, not the emperor. And so in going back and doing some archaeology, they sort of have figured out that Diocletian was not such a terrible person, but he did have a very strong cult of personality, and a religious cult, because it was very common for Caesars to be worshipped, and sort of a parallel as a sun god thing. Came over from Egypt with Augustus and Octavian and all this kind of stuff. So there was some conflict between Christians and sort of the Roman cult around emperor worship. However, Diocletian, however you say it, he wasn't Nero, which is what everybody sort of thinks of, this sort of coming after the Christians, throwing them in colosseums with lions and just slaughtering them in the streets. You know, the whole fish sign thing where one person makes the ark with their foot and then the other person makes the ark and it makes that little fish that we then put on our bumpers. All that's like Nero and other times. Like, that is not this time. But we used to think it was. And so there's often, that's part of the traditional context of Revelation being about this sort of end times and this Roman persecution that's heavy and terrible. That's not really accurate. However, that's not to say persecution wasn't happening. There was conflict, especially in Asia Minor and Turkey at the time. And the conflict was more about, these churches were sort of arguing amongst themselves, do they need to isolate themselves away from Roman culture and pull away from society, sort of becoming more independent and isolated from the cities around them? Or should they sort of be part of the culture in some form or fashion? And it's really an argument that happens today in churches. Are we counterculture or are we with culture? Are we, how involved are we in everyday action and life of people in society? Should we be pushing our beliefs that should be the laws of society? Or should we be pulling back and doing our own thing our own way? Methodists, we have a lobby sitting across from the White House. Our little lobby arm has offices right across. That's sort of one wing of, we should be in culture. But then you might look at the Amish or the Mennonites and they're very isolated, right? So this is part of the argument that's happening thousands of years ago with a similar, and it creates pressure and conflict. Even amongst the churches as they try to figure this out. And there were a lot of consequences. There were extra taxes if you weren't involved in imperial worship. And, there could be mobs that showed up. And these churches were often filled with a lot of lower class persons. There'd usually be one or two kind of upper class, richer patrons, or actually usually matrons, sort of paying for everything. And then a lot of slaves and poor free people. And then, so rich Roman citizens often considered it, a threat to have this sort of cult, raising up mobs of Christians who, would trick you by baking babies into bread and cutting it open. And that was your first communion. And that's how they tricked you to be a Christian. Baby. Once you ate a baby, you couldn't leave because you'd committed some crime. You think that is actual Roman belief about what Christians did. We have that in writing. It was wild. So there's all this sort of stuff going on. But this wasn't Nero's time where they're like collecting up the Christians in the street. It wasn't that bad, but it still wasn't great. So
is that where the whole king cake, baby in the king cake came from?
I have wondered about that with Barbie Girl. I do not think they are related at all. But it is interesting that the baby is baked in a cake. But yeah, it was the belief that you were tricked to be a Christian because they would trick you into coming to one of the meetings, and then you would have communion, and communion was this blood sacrifice of a baby baked in the bread.
Oh.
Because they, when they heard Christians talking about body and blood, they
Yeah.
took it literally, and said, "Oh, they're blood worshipers," and things like that. So, yeah, good fun. Those Romans. Because they were doing such great things in their worship. So that's where we're going to stop tonight with the historical context and things like that. Are there any other questions about like history or who this John might be? There's a lot of speculation that he's a prisoner on Patmos, because Patmos was a common sort of prison island that the Romans would use. But it also, it's like next to the Mykonos and Rhodes, like it's probably gorgeous. I would happily be in prison there now. Any other questions or thoughts?
No.
So next week we'll just I would read chapter 1, maybe
Yeah, I had a question about that.
get very far. So
What translation are we reading?
I will be reading NRSV, non-revised standard version, because that's
New
considered
revised? Non-revised?
New revised, sorry. New revised. Non-revised. No, new revised. That's sort of the academic translation today. Like when I write my ordination paperwork, it has to be an RSV. However, I encourage you to read any translation you are comfortable with or like. I am a fan of you bringing up the fact that one translation may say one thing, another say another. And we can talk about that and get into the Greek words there about why they're different. And so if you're comfortable with, King James, go for it. I will shred it if you do King James. King James translation has a lot of stuff in it that's not really accurate, but it sounds great.
True.
There's no way. King James is the most poetic Bible ever written, at least for English. Like it's so beautiful, but it's also just terribly inaccurate when it comes to translation.
Don't let the facts confuse a good story.
And there are
Right.
stories that I will argue that is the truth of it. Don't let historical inaccuracies mess up the truth. But
Now, I have the Living Bible paraphrase. Is that okay?
sure, that's fine.
All right.
But just know that when I read, I'm going to be reading it. And what will happen is, and I'm going to stop our recording.